This week in Pure Reinvention.
Well, community comes in different forms. A family is a community. Obviously, our neighborhoods, our schools are communities. Our higher ed institutions are communities. It's important for people to feel welcome and feel like they're part of whatever community that they belong to.
Episode 78, Michele Strasz, Executive Director of the Capital Area College Access Network.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention, where we create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle. Michele had some really great nuggets, Misty.
She did. She's all about community and collaboration, and I think I learned a couple of new things from Michele.
I think one of the opportunities that really exists in this new space that we're going to with leadership is really teaching leaders to be better at collaborating.
I think the longer you're at any job, but doing any work, it's hard to remember to go outside of whatever established, inbound group you have. And I think Michele reminds us that it is good to stay and keep that community alive so you're able to have new connections, new ideas, and new resources.
That more collaborative leadership style is absolutely going to resonate with the space that we're moving into as we start to move away from the more military style of leadership. And I think the comments that Michele makes will be very inspiring to those who will listen.
Let's give it a listen.
This week's episode is sponsored by HRM Services, providing solutions that work. HRMS provides customized human resource consulting services to fit the unique needs of their clients. Every client has a story, and they make it their business to learn yours. Contact HRM Services today at 517-974-8033 or visit their website at hrmservices.biz.
Michele, tell us a little bit about what the Capital Area College Access Network is.
So the Capital Area College Access Network is part of a statewide organization called the Michigan College Access Network, and we have many different community collaboratives across the state that are organized to help promote college attainment in our communities with our schools and with our higher ed institutions to really make sure that students are ready, participating, and complete through their post-secondary experience.
Now, how can people learn more about your work?
We have a website, which is capitalareacan.org. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn as well.
You're everywhere students need to find you.
Well,
right?
No, we're not on Instagram, which is where they're all at, but we do our best.
Today.
Right.
Who knows where else they'll be tomorrow.
Exactly.
I want to start out our conversation like we do with all of our guests by asking you of the 5 steps in the reinvention process, which step do you most closely align yourself with?
I most closely align with the connect. I'm all about building relationships with not only people, but within organizations, communities, and then across systems. I've spent most of my career working at the state level, and it was always my job to connect the policy work that I did at the state level to communities, to stakeholders or constituents at the local level, and then sometimes to bridge that gap between the state level and the federal level, particularly when I worked in the advocacy environment. Now that I'm working at CapCan, I am on the ground in the community, and I am able to be the bridge and the translator between all the different partners that I have around the table to try and promote college access and college readiness for our students in the community. So obviously connecting is really important to my work. It's personally part of who I am. I'm a problem solver, and I try to listen and understand what people's needs are and be very respectful of those needs and their culture, and try and put together solutions that meet those needs, and of course, ultimately to advance the needs of the children of our community. Because as we'll talk more, I'm sure, I've always been a professional children's advocate. So everything I do is really at its heart what's in the best interest of kids.
Michele, tell us what your superpower is.
My superpower is probably a combination of kindness, respect, and diplomacy. I've always worked in a political environment, so I believe very strongly if I'm going to help build relationships that sometimes someone has to be the grown-up and be the diplomat and help listen and, again, be a translator and bridge those things. So I put those things together to try and help create win-win situations for people or for institutions. And then you always got to kill them with kindness.
What keeps you up at night?
I think confrontation keeps me up at night. I was reflecting on this before I came in that I don't like when people use confrontation to manipulate situations or manipulate people. And I agonize over having to confront somebody about something that's difficult because I am about the relationship and I am about creating win-win situations.
How do you navigate through confrontation or through disruption without it being so scary that we stop?
Well, I think one thing is recognizing that change is inevitable, even though we all like safety and status quo, but everything is constantly changing. I mean, our bodies are changing, our situations are changing, our relationships are changing. So you just have to recognize that change is inevitable. But within that, does the change have to be a good thing or a bad thing? And if it's inevitable, then how do we create a win-win out of it? How do we use that change for good? So I think a lot of times it's just understanding all the things that are at play. And so part of what I think my strength is assessing the situation and assessing the dynamics, not only of the people in the room, but all of the competing agendas that people come to the table with, particularly on boards. Everybody has their own agenda, even though they may be on the board representing your organization. You certainly come to that table with your agenda or your lens. And so understanding what is driving you as an individual or driving the organization that's at the table. I think it's important to be strategic. I think it's important to do your homework. I've been accused of taking too long to make a decision, but I'm a huge believer in process. So if you make a decision before the process has completed itself, I think sometimes you jump over some steps that need to happen. And the tension can be used for strength and can be used for good, ultimately, to get to the right outcome for an organization.
So disruption doesn't necessarily have to be confrontational if proper thought and wisdom and balance of understanding all sides of an issue prior to and doing a good assessment, like what you are talking about, as opposed to an immediate change just because you felt like it.
Right. I grew up, so to speak, in my professional life working for many lobbyists and advocacy organizations. And so a big part of what we always had to do was count our votes. So if the first time you go through and you count your votes, you don't have enough votes, well, then you have to go and sway people to come on board with however you want them to vote. And part of that is assessing what do they need to get out of it, and how do you create a win-win for them and for you in order to get to the outcome that you want to do.
So what you've really described, and this is very interesting as I listen to this, is the disruption you may identify in your head that needs to take place, or the new end result, doesn't have to be out in the public until you do your assessment, until you get a good feel for where the people are in this issue. And sometimes just throwing out the change may be so disruptive because we haven't assessed properly yet what the climate of acceptance is.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's very true. Obviously, when there's a crisis, then you have to deal with that. But if you're trying to move an organization that's, been doing the same thing for 20, 30 years, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because there's a lot of good stuff there. And you have to figure out what's good, what needs to be maintained, what maintains the integrity of the organization and the mission of the organization, and then what things can be brought to bear to adapt.
So disruption is actually something, depending on how we approach it, is something that can actually be a wonderful tool and give us the reason why when we do the proper assessment and the thorough thought process like what you described.
Yeah, definitely. Every time you switch directors of an organization, it's a period of disruption. It's just a natural thing that's going to happen within your organization. And so it gives everybody time to stop and say, what is it that we want to do differently? And how do we want to make a fresh start, maybe if you're an employee who had a bad relationship with a previous director, how can you maybe set yourself up for a better relationship with this new director? What did you learn from that previous experience that you can now make work for yourself going forward?
Walk me through where you were able to kind of process all the different levels and why all these different levels are so important in the connect phase.
Sure. Well, when I first started at CapCan, the very first thing that I did was go out and do one-on-one interviews with each one of my board members. I didn't know everyone. I knew a few people, but I needed to know who they were. I needed to know what they brought to the table. And I needed to know what it was they liked about the organization and what they were hoping to accomplish now with me being on board. And from that experience, then I compiled all of those interviews into a document that I shared at my very first board meeting with everybody, saying, this is what you all said, and this is what was consistent across what you all said. But then this is some of the nuances of things that some of you said to me that you'd like to do. And what it helped us all understand was where there was commonality and shared vision and goals going forward. And then where were some things that we needed to work on. It might have been just educating those of us who are new, myself included, about what's the purpose of the organization, or what's the dynamics we're dealing with in the community, what's the data we needed to get a handle on, whatever that might be. So it was a great starting point, and I certainly am now almost 2 years into it, and I need to go back again and do the same thing. Not only do I have a lot of new board members because we've been cultivating new leadership, but I want to see and touch base with our longtime board members and make sure that we're still on the same page and make sure that we're still moving forward in the way that they would like to see us move forward as a group. So it's back to what I started with, the translating and listening. I mean, I think a big part of the thing that I have learned over the years is how to be a better listener. I always thought I was good at that to begin with, but I think I've gotten even better at it over time. And it's not just listening to the words that people say, it's seeing their body language, or it's seeing how they interact in the community and understanding what's the core thing driving them.
We've been recently highlighting some thoughts relative to the importance of the community. Speak a little bit about why community.
Well, community comes in different forms. A family is a community. Obviously, our neighborhoods, our schools are communities. Our higher ed institutions are communities. And it's important for people to feel welcome and feel like they're part of whatever community that they belong to, big or small. It's been really interesting working with my partners in the schools, because as I talk about our students, I talk about them as our students. I don't talk about them as yours, it's our. So even just how I refer to them makes everyone, I hope, feel like they're part of our community. And so when we go from K-12 and then we transition to higher ed, I'm giving you our students, so to speak.
Can you speak to how an individual has the power to connect to a community rather than be accepted or wait for an invitation to be a part of a community?
Well, I think it's important for all of us to put ourselves out there, but sometimes we don't know how to do that. And that's a big part of what our education community is trying to teach young people, of the skills of how to connect and how to advocate for themselves so that they can connect to the community, to the resources that are available to them. Because if you never ask and you never say, I'm not sure, then no one ever has the sense that you need some help and can respond and show you that you really are part of that community.
It seems like a lot of people today are waiting for somebody to invite them to be a part of their community. And I think what you're suggesting is it's up to us as individuals to take those first steps and to walk towards the community that we want to be a part of, or to initiate the energy it takes to create the community that we want, and not just wait for the community to find us.
To some extent, yes, I think that's true. But I think we also, as adults, need to model that for children. So we expect that of adults to just do that. But I don't think kids naturally always know how to do that. If you grow up in a family that's supportive and loving and nurturing, you learn that right away. There's a sense of security in knowing that there's always going to be someone there to hold you, to hug you, to calm you down, to comfort you. It's those skills that help then students navigate the rest of the journey from school to college, post-secondary to work. So we have to model that along the way. It's not something that I think everybody does naturally. And community is something that we have to, like any relationship, you have to constantly work on.
Michele, thank you. This has been an awesome interview.
Thank you.
Misty, what does it mean when listening is more than just the words?
Oh, I think that's a great question. And Michele brought that up with such expert advice that listening is more than what people say. And I think that means that you're watching their behavior. You're also reading between the lines, because not everybody's a perfect communicator that it can articulate exactly what they're thinking. But if you have a long enough conversation with them, you're really able to tune in and hear what they're trying to tell you.
I think that's so important that I think we sometimes forget that perhaps the words is only 10% of the total message, and eye contact, body language, posture, all the other ways in which we message are so incredibly important. And Michele reminded us of it, and I think it's always important to remember in leadership.
And taking that into the community space, the place that Michelle's really knowledgeable in, and in reinvention, it's ongoing. So listening is, I would add to it, not just a one-time thing. It's constant. Even though you feel like you've heard that person say this before, they might be saying something slightly different in a way that pings a new idea or sheds new light on it.
Well, and I think Michele reminded us that as the reinvention project is emerging, we have to remember there's something called graduated understanding. That so this week we know what we know, but maybe in a month we'll know something different. So our answers will sometimes change. Our conversation will change because we're a month later down the road, and what we've learned during that period of time, because it's such a dynamic environment, has changed. And so just because we agreed on something a month ago, as we've learned more, the power of being able to constantly assess, reassess, and realizing that you're in a dynamic environment is going to be very, very, very important.
Yes. And on top of that, what she said about disruption being a natural process, or change being a natural process, I forget which word she used, but all the same, it's true. And that you just sort of have to assess and go with it.
Yes, I absolutely believe that one of the reasons that paralyzes leaders from going into the reinvention space is they think they have to have it all figured out before they get started.
Oh, yeah.
And the reality is, in an emerging trend, in an emerging environment, you learn as you go. A lot of the people that we have been interviewing will tell us those exact same things, that if you focus on trying to understand what the end is going to look like as it's emerging, that's not going to be as effective as just moving into that space and learning as you go. And again, that's that graduated understanding. We have to realize that we're learning, and every time we're learning, we're getting closer towards the end.
And just like Michele said, and I think she's right on, that you just have to assess the dynamics of the situation as they present themselves. It doesn't mean that you have all the answers right away. And that's something we've said before, but it's so important to remind people that it's always a risk. There's always unknowns. It should not stop you from taking that next step.
Well, Misty, and that's why the community is so important, because with the community thought process behind that energy, you tend to take away the risk, right? We are de-risking the direction that we're going, because we have a community who's watching out, who brings in different perspectives, who's all learning at the same time, who all is owning and is invested. And so that community actually de-risks the entire project, and that's why community or connectivity is so important.
And Michele makes a good point about the modeling that engagement throughout with her students and with the people that she works with. But also, I think as we go forward, we need to keep that in mind for everyone. You can always model better engagement and better listening skills.
If you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it Pure Reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter @Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.